Hi there, we're here today for a conversation with our superintendent, Dr. Greg Baker. My name's Jackie Brawley. I'm the Executive Director of Communications and Community Relations, and we wanted the chance to talk to Dr. Baker about a few topics that are in the news and certainly part of a lot of different conversations. Hi, Dr. Baker.
Hello there, Jackie.
This reminds me of our COVID days, except we get to be in person.
Much better.
And I might have a few more gray hairs too, compared to back then. Let's start off by talking about enrollment and the Facilities Planning Task Force. This is a group of people who have been meeting since February to look at enrollment data, projections, conditions of buildings, and certainly it's a hot topic right now in our community.
It has been, and I want to say thanks to the task force for their work. They're, I think, completing this phase of the work up, and we'll be sharing out the recommendations. And they've worked incredibly hard. There's 35, I think, or so folks on there that represent our community. Each person has different roles, whether they're staff and their parents. Some went to school here. The common theme is they care about our district and community, and as I've watched from a distance, they've just done a phenomenal job of what we asked, which is look at the data, confirm what we think it's telling us, and what might we do because of that. You know, the impact on enrollment based upon the birth rates is a global, national, statewide. You know, that over the last few months we've definitely continued to see that impacting our communities, and so we've engaged in a very thoughtful process to look at it from all angles. And I think the community, when they see the recommendations and can read through those, will see the results of a very thoughtful process by a group of people that care about our community.
Talk a little bit about next steps. So the recommendation will be coming out soon, and then what happens?
Yeah, so, and I've just seen a draft of the recommendations, so I have a sense of, I think they're fine-tuning, just some final edits. And I think their recommendations will be around our elementary, that as that enrollment has dropped and continues to drop over the next 5 years. You know, with our birth rates, you're looking at about 1,000 fewer kids from 5 years ago, from 5 years to now. That's 1,000 out of 5,000 or so kids at the elementary. So that's a significant drop. And so I think their analysis will show that having fewer facilities makes sense. And again, a lot of communities are coming to the same conclusion. And so I think our next steps will be, I want to hear some feedback from the community. We've been certainly over the past few months hearing from a number of people, especially those that have seen that they likely may be affected. So we've had lots of feedback, but I think the broader community would like to be able to give them a chance to read the recommendations, look at the analysis, and give me their perspectives. So I want to make sure I hear as many different perspectives out there. I think one of the recommendations will be around fine-tuning what boundary adjustments could look like. And so I think that feels prudent so that we can share with families if we reduce the number of schools, consolidate, where those students would go. I think the task force did a lot of work of different ideas, but I think we need to narrow it down to what it would be. I think we could bring in some additional families from those communities that would be affected to give some feedback. And again, boundary adjustments is something we do throughout the history of the district. So as we know, it's challenging work because it's change for folks, but we've done it before. We'll have to do it again in the future. And we're fortunate that we have a district with great schools. So even if you adjust a boundary or shift a school, it's an adjustment, but we have really great options of where students and families end up going.
One thing that I've heard folks say is that there's an assumption that this is where the district started. Like, well, we have budget issues, enrollment's going down, and so the district starting with the solution, their idea to close some schools. Mm-hmm. Can you give some context to that? Like, what are some other budget savings measures that the district has looked at and has done over the past few years?
Yeah, as you know, we've had 3 years in a row of pretty significant budget challenges with high inflation, the state not funding the cost of schools, lower enrollment. And so changing the number of schools has not been the top 100 list. It's now, as we look into year 4, a strategy. It's something I've been asked about through the years, but it's not something we've wanted to do. It hasn't, the birth rate phenomena around the country and world has not been as clear as it is now. So it's not one that we'd wanted to do. So things that we've done, the list is long, but certainly first is class size adjustment. So in many areas of the district, adjusting class sizes, reduction of staff, especially at the district office over the past 3 years has been there. Reducing some services, now especially as enrollment has gone down, so a little bit less counseling, a little bit less nursing, a little bit less of everything has been. A year ago, the ones I'd go out to PTAs and staff and talk about that we haven't done is change the high school schedule and the number of schools. So this year we engaged in the high school schedule and went, the state kind of funds this at a 6-period model. We were at an enriched 8. We're going to a 7, so that body of work was this year, so that is a big budget impact. And then that still leaves the consolidation of school question. So those are some of the things, and you probably can list another 100, but class size adjustment, reduction of staffing, district office, services across the board. There's probably not a department that hasn't been impacted.
I also think about last year, there were furlough days, the school year shrunk by 1, a lot of different staffing groups either had a pay freeze or various percentages were reduced too.
Yeah, that's right.
You mentioned the district office, and I think there are a lot of people, that is like a buzzword right now. This building that we're in, and frankly, I think just some misunderstanding of the funding and the plans that went into rebuilding this facility. We used to be located over on DuPont Street. Can you give us like a little bit of a history lesson, I guess, on how we got to this building that stands here before us?
Yeah, you bet. My history would be, about a 20-year period. So our old district office was an elementary school, I think built in 1908, so a couple pandemics ago. It was an elementary school until the 70s, and then it's served as a district office for decades. In 2006, so 20 years ago, there was dollars put on a bond to do some improvements to that building, seismic retrofit specifically. And so there was a known need. That building didn't have AD accessibility, no elevator, it would flood, and is a 100-plus-year-old building. When I got here in 2010 and assessed the district, one of the things that we did is we went through a process and we paused the improvements to the district office that were supposed to be made, and we put them towards our highest need elementary school and rebuilt Birchwood Elementary with those dollars. And that was a community process from our school board down to our broader community. So again, an adjustment we made to thinking from previous with the current conditions. We then, for the next 10 years, really focused on our schools. We rebuilt Seahome, we rebuilt the new options, Happy Valley, Lowell, Sunnyland, Alderwood Park. So really focusing on our schools, and kept the district office as let's keep thinking about what the right thing is. Is it to rebuild that current building? Is it to build somewhere else and be open? And for years, we've gone, opened it. We've taken ideas and explored many ideas. From building different places, taking over buildings. And then a number of years ago, we were approached with the idea of coming to Berkeley. We went through a lengthy process with our community, the pros and cons. I remember meeting with multiple different groups. One was our parent advisory committee, and I remember going around the room to every single person on that committee and talked about the challenge of building a new facility for a district office you can be vulnerable for people to say you built this. And so I was probably the voice of like, we got to be really careful here. And we were really careful. And what we ended up doing is identifying a location here that was very central, good access with bus lines. Every family in the district knows where across from the movie theater is. The infrastructure that was already here versus building somewhere else without infrastructure or remodeling a 100-year-old building. Fiscally made sense. And as we went around the room in that space and the school board and other groups, it was like, that's a great idea. you're talking about the next 40, 50, maybe longer years for this facility. It's a place we want to be proud of. This district has shown that it's put kids first. We've been rebuilding our buildings, and the district office is an important asset as well, and we have important work that gets done there, and we want to care about that as well. And so we really worked through a community process of what kind of things would we have in a district office besides you and I working here. And one of the values was a place the community can use. And so as we built our professional learning center here, it's been magical. It's a place for learning. So we have students come during the day, we have staff, and then in the evenings and weekends, the community uses this space. So that's been outstanding. When we think about the Early Learning Center, to have our youngest kids here and serving them has been amazing. And our architect that designed it is local, is a parent in our district, cares greatly about this community, and was very proud of the work that he did in designing it, along with a committee that gave input. The construction company Dawson and our local contractors, again, local folks that grew up here, have kids in our district, a lot of pride in building a facility to serve our community. So when times get tough and people, when budgets are tough, pointing at the district office, whether it's the facility or the people, just happens. And I get that, and I wish that wasn't the case, but I understand that's the context. But if you take a step back, I'm extremely proud of what this community and the school board and our staff have done to take care of our facilities for our kids and for our staff. And this is a building that, for the next however many decades, I think will be a great asset to this community.
Can I clarify something about the 2022 bond?
Yeah.
Because that's something that there have been questions about that. There's an assumption that that there was some sort of change, like we changed our mind about certain funds and used it for the district office. So I'd love for you just to kind of clarify.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of misinformation out there. The reality is what's happened is when we've done our construction projects through the years is, and I've shared this in some other forums, is you don't get to know the exact cost of the building. Like you're trying to guess sometimes 4, 5, 7 years in advance of how much a building's going to cost. You haven't even designed it yet. So you're making these estimates. And over the past, decade and a half, or the time I've been here, we've been where inflation has gone up. Now, sometimes in the history of a community or district, you guess and inflation, costs go down, and you actually can build something less than you thought. But that hasn't been the case here in our lifetime, recent lifetime. And so you're constantly, when you go out to the community for a bond, it's years of work and planning, and you're trying to guess what a cost will be years in the future. You haven't even hired an architect yet and designed the building. And so you make a guess, and you go get those dollars, and then you start designing the building, and costs go up, and you start going through the permitting process, and those rules change and costs change. And then you get to the real number, and so what you have to do is adjust what your budget is. And so this is something we've done in most bonds, is that you have some dollars to finish projects that cost more than what you projected. And so we went out with that 2022 bond knowing that we would need some additional dollars to fund some projects previously, and we made that, that was transparent, so in my view. And we've done that before, and we'll probably have to do it again. But what we've tried to do is learn from that, and I've shared this a few times, is try to get better estimates. And the only way to do that I figured out is from when the bond passes to construction, how do you eliminate that time? So one of the things we did in this last bond is put some planning dollars for the next projects so that we could start design early, have a better sense of how much when we go out to the voters and ask for a bond. But that also adds a little bit of confusion to folks, because they're like, oh, I thought you had dollars to build a new facility, and it's meaning the new schools. And it's like, no, it was some design dollars so we could design it, get a better cost estimate, and then a next bond go out and have a better, it's confusing just to even describe a little bit.
Yeah, no, it makes sense as far as planning the building first, getting a good estimate, and then go out for a future bond. But I think you are highlighting an area that there is some confusion, because in the 2022 bond, there were dollars to start some processes for the 3 oldest elementary schools. And now some of those potentially could be facing closure, which for a community, I think they've got emotions, they've got feelings, and they've got confusion. And so how do you help folks, I guess, kind of come along and also just increase their understanding of how and why we're in the place that we are today?
I found that the more people are willing to look at the facts and have a conversation, the more they can go, oh, I just didn't know that. And you don't know until you need to know. Like if you weren't in our district conversation 5 years ago or 10 or 15, you wouldn't know the history. And so I think what's happened over the past few months is some folks have kind of rushed to, oh, I'm going to lose something or something, and they've then tried to create a storyline and they don't know the whole history. And so they've searched for the storyline and maybe rushed to an answer that's not quite accurate. So what I'd say to people is, if it's an interest to find out what the history actually is and the facts, we've worked hard on our website under an FAQ section to try to clarify that. And sometimes a conversation is the most helpful, and our team has been sitting down with lots of people and talking them through. And for most folks, they can get to a place of, oh, okay, I didn't know that. And I can understand that now. And then for some folks, I don't know if we'll ever fully get them there, I hope so, but it really is that best intent. I feel very strongly that our team, our staff, our board works very hard with an ethos of transparency, honesty, high ethics, caring about the fiscal responsibility of taxpayer dollars. And those are high values. And so the fact that over the past few months it's got kind of messy where folks have challenged that has been hard to see. And so we've worked hard to try to help provide clarity. I think if people give it a chance to authentically learn the context fully, they will see that.
What, I don't mean this to be like a trick question, but like, what does transparency mean to you? Because that's something that word is being thrown around a bit, and trying to get at the heart of it. You're saying the district is holding up transparency as a high value, and yet it's also something that I would say that we're being criticized for quite a bit.
We've worked hard, in my opinion, to be willing to be flexible and adjust as the context changes. One of our key strategies of the promise is flexibility and innovation. And when you do that, you risk confusion and people thinking you're not doing something right because you're adjusting. And something you said 5 years ago with the context maybe is different. So there's a downside to being flexible and innovative, maybe, is that not everyone's necessarily following the changes. We've had to pause numerous times with things that we didn't expect. COVID was a good example. We had something come at us, we had to pause, change a whole bunch of things that we thought we were going to do, and adjust and move forward. Similar with a construction project 5-10 years later than when you first started the conversation costs more, you got to adjust. Birth rates dropping across the globe, country, locally, and thus lower enrollment, and it's not just a couple year trend, it's maybe going to be longer and longer. You got to pause and adjust. So each time we've had to do that, or a change of like thinking of where we might build a school, okay, let's build on the north side because that's where the growth is. That was the context. And then it was like, oh, there's a new idea to maybe build on the civic site in a different location. Let's pause and adjust that or examine that. Now we have a different enrollment trend. So each time we do that, I feel like we've paused and been very open with it, but that causes, if you don't like if you're counting on where we were headed, you can get frustrated that it's now shifting. But we've worked really hard to be very open with the rationale, the context, and then make the switch and not be afraid to change the direction. But that can be hard for folks, either because they don't want the new direction they were counting on the previous, or they just haven't followed the storyline and they think it was maybe more of a willy-nilly adjustment. So I think when you look at our track record and you look at our FAQ and you look at the history, we have limited resources, so we don't get to communicate to every single person in the city every day with the change of thinking. But when it's an important one, we work hard with the tools that we have and the resources we have to make sure people that are interested have a high likelihood of knowing what we're doing.
Yep.
But it's a challenge for sure.
Yep. I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I'm hoping that we can talk a little bit about budget. Like you said, the high school schedule is changing, and that's part of a bigger reduction plan. Can you talk a little bit about how are decisions made when it comes to, we've heard some impassioned pleas by some people who are really sad about, losing this staff member, or some of these positions are changing, or our library model. Can you talk a little bit about how those decisions are made and why?
We're now at a level where budget making is a year-round process, and there's multiple levels that influence the end result. One is the state and what the state does. And as the state continues to not, in my opinion, amply fund education, which they're constitutionally supposed to do, that impacts our budget. So that's probably the biggest factor that's at play, is the state not funding just to maintain what we're doing. So what the state does greatly impacts what we do as a district. The next is year-round. We're engaging with our community in so many ways. We work with our labor groups throughout the whole year. We engage with our parents. I hear from kids all the time. So you're constantly hearing from people that have a stake in our educational, in our district, of what they think. And so you're taking that in. You're looking at practices around the state. So what is it the norm to be able to have certificated librarians? Not so much anymore. The state doesn't fund that model, and so it's more the model that is more and more is using. We'll still have libraries. We'll still have them open. They'll just be staffed by a different licensed type of person that's more cost efficient. We love our librarians. We've lasted longer than any other district in the area. So none of these cuts are things we want to do, but because of those pieces, you have to make adjustments. That's an area that we can make an adjustment. I'd rather not have to make it, but we can keep libraries open in all of our schools and just staff it differently. So so you're looking for how to maximize keeping things that are important, but also being flexible with how you do it, and it maybe isn't the model you wish. It's similar over the years with our nursing model. Most people believe we should have the state should fund a nurse in every school, and they don't. And so we have to be creative, and we have some nurses that are licensed in a certain way, and we have health specialists that are licensed in a different way, and we're trying to be as efficient as possible with limited resources to provide the best service we can. So every part of the organization, you're adjusting from what maybe the gold standard would be, and you're trying to figure out how to be as efficient as possible with diminishing resources. So through all that, throughout the whole year, you're wrestling with all these different ideas, different scenarios. You're finding out from the federal government what the rule changes are with title dollars, with grant funding. You have the state with LAP dollars. So every day the context changes, and you're trying to take all of that in, and then you have declining enrollment, and you throw that in there, and you process and you try to come up with the best ideas you can, and then you keep working it and keep adjusting it. And it's now we're in the process of assessing for next year what's going to happen, not only with a number of schools we have, but what's the legislature going to do? Are they going to do something that helps school districts across the state, or not? Are we going to be in another space if we've got to take another next level of reductions?
So the state is an important piece of this conversation, and I have seen people have questions about what's the district doing with their budget? Is there some level of mismanagement or something like that? So maybe you can speak a little bit to that and the important role the state plays when it comes to setting our budget and figuring out what are our expenditures, how much money's coming in.
Yeah. So to that comment of people saying that there's mismanagement, that's as far from the truth as you can get, in my opinion. We have an outstanding fiscal team that is highly recognized. If you want transparency, go to the website and find our budget book, and I'll put that up against anyone in the state in terms of our team's work to be very transparent. We get an audit each year. We get great audits. Our team is phenomenal. So And our board recognizes that through the years, and my evaluation recognizes that our team, the fiscal care that we take care of for our is high. So when people talk about, a counter narrative to that, I think I would just encourage them to come and engage with our team, and I think they'll find out that's not the case. Most of our budget comes from the state. The majority of it, we then have a portion that local communities can run our local levies that's significant, and then a smaller amount that's from federal dollars and grant dollars. But the majority comes from the state, and so as the state goes, school districts go. And they got sued a decade plus ago for not funding education, the McCleary suit. And when that landed in 2017 and the implications, school funding increased. And now with inflation, what those dollars can buy has diminished. And so as I've said, we're probably in a place where there's got to be a change, whether that's another lawsuit, something significant, because this isn't a Bellingham thing. Every day in the paper, if you look around the state, you'll see the same storyline happening. And our Constitution in the state of Washington is the strongest in the country that's for education. It says the paramount duty of the state is to amply fund K-12 education. So that's the first thing they're supposed to do, is fund the K-12 system before they do anything else, which they do other important things. But the paramount duty is K-12 funding. So it's super frustrating for people like us and a community that cares about education so much that the main funding mechanism really is broken and is not being followed constitutionally. And that's really what's at the root of much of the angst.
So what gets you going? Like, how do you get out of bed every day? I mean, this is heavy, hard stuff. We're talking about potentially closing a school. We've got budget challenges. And yet you walk into any of our schools on any given day and there is learning, there is joy. How do you make sense of all this as the superintendent?
Yeah, it's a great question. Last night I was trying to get perspective as I was watching the news and seeing some of the hard things that people in our community and across the country and globe are dealing with. Sometimes gives me perspective of, compared to those things, we're going to be okay if we have students go, instead of being at this school, go to this school. We're going to be okay. If we have to adjust our instructional model or a library model, we're going to be okay. Compared to other things in the world, we're going to be okay. I've shared this across the country as I've been asked to speak at different things. In Bellingham, we have a magical place. And certainly right now we have tough things going on that are happening all over the place, but it feels tough here. But we have a magical place of a community that cares about education at a high level. They support education at a high level with the passing of levies and bonds. We have a school board that is high level, cares about the whole district. They're in it for the right reasons. We have a staff that wants to live in Bellingham and work here and cares about kids at a high level. And we have amazing kids doing amazing things. So perspective-wise, we have all the conditions to, even during these hard times of funding, birth rate enrollment, politics, we have as good a shot as anyone to get through it in a positive way. So perspective for me, not that everyone has to agree with how I do it, but you asked me, I try to keep perspective. And we have people around the world and locally, like one of the stories I was watching last night, around, I was in a meeting yesterday talking about some of our families who the parents have been deported, right? And so that family is left without a father or a mother. That's something. And so in some ways, we can manage these other things. There's harder things going on. I don't want to try to diminish the impact of someone having to switch schools or less resource, but perspective is probably the key thing I try to keep in mind.
Great. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time and answering all these questions too. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Jackie.